All
audience
right.
mic today?
Hmm?
Do we need an audience mic today? Probably not.
No, we just ask everyone to yell.
Shout? Okay.
Shout. I mean, we could do the mic, but
I don't think this one's batteries.
I have batteries for my same mic, basically the same thing. Let's just in case. Assuming I actually did bring it. No, I didn't, because I was like, oh, we got the other mic. We're fine.
It's a great prop.
It turns on. Oh, but the battery indicator is like non-existent. Okay, never mind. The lapel mic doesn't work either.
I'm not sure.
Actually, we did test it. It does work. But anyways, who cares?
All right.
All right. What do we got here? Oh, no video. Right now, just a screen. For yours, it'll be just that screen, because I'm literally going to just turn the laptop at that screen.
I have a face for radio.
All right. Cool. Okay. Hey, everyone. Hi. Hi. Welcome to the strike edition of ISSessions. What?
Last one was strike edition.
Well, it didn't count because I wasn't here. So. Yeah, sorry. It's the Thraki inaugural strike edition of ISSessions. So, anyways, yeah, it's a little quiet, but that's okay. Obviously, Nick cannot be here because he cannot break the picket line, but that's cool. So we're gonna get right into it, hit some headlines, and then we'll do a bit of a deep dive on something, and then we're gonna have Fernando, our guest, is gonna come and talk about the economics of InfoSec, which I've seen like versions of the talk, and it's awesome. It's really cool. So I'm pretty excited to see a slightly more evolved version of it. It always, I'm sure you update it and change it over the years, right? Yeah. So I always enjoy seeing that. Okay, so let's get into it. So, oh, and by the way, Dave's here with me. For those of you who can't see him on the stream, if anyone's even watching the stream, but whatever. You'll watch it later. So I had to start off with this one because it's kind of funny. And I mean, Osama bin Laden was a terrible, 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 awful, awful human being. But the CIA released thousands of files that were contained on Osama bin Laden's computer, from his compound. And I think by far the most hilarious thing for me personally, and I don't know if this article specifically mentions it, but my absolute favorite thing. Whoa there, Zoom. Okay, yeah, my absolute favorite thing was the fact that he had his Animal Crossing save files from a 3DS. I believe it was from an emulator, actually, on the computer. So, and there was all sorts of like pirated software and like even videos of documentaries about himself.
Some anime in there.
There's some anime. So like he was just trying to kill some time in that cave, I guess. I don't know, while hiding out.
There were some fun facts in there, though. He apparently had a Steam account, was playing Counter-Strike, allegedly, according to Twitter. So,
wonder what side he played.
Yeah.
Well. Do you think he played counter-terrorists?
I really hope so.
Yeah, well, I mean, his whole history is a complicated thing, right? But anyways, I didn't want to spend too much time on that. I just wanted to bring it up. It's not really InfoSec related. So as we go to secure mobile platforms, and mobile platforms become really a primary device for more and more people. In fact, I would say probably a huge majority of people, their mobile device is really their primary device in terms of the hours they put into it, in terms of their life being contained in it, and it being connected to absolutely everything. So we will be talking about the whole pwn-to-own competition in our sort of deep dive. But not only are the devices themselves very complex and involve millions and millions of lines of code. The apart from the operating systems themselves being vulnerable, we have copycat apps in things like the Google Play Store, or even in the Apple App Store. You'll see, for example, games that are basically just like blatant ripoffs of, they rip off all the artwork and all the all the different assets from a game and make some stupid copy cutter thing and try to get people to pay for it, right? So this is nothing new, but what's particularly interesting about this one is the fact that this was essentially it was like a fake sort of WhatsApp. It's called Update WhatsApp Messenger, and it got over 1 million downloads, and Google did nothing about it before it started to sort of gain traction, right? So people are. It's been pretty heavily proven that Google is not doing a fantastic job of keeping outright malware out of their store. They're doing better. They've improved. They've gotten better, but it's still a big problem. So when you combine that problem with the fact that they're not doing a good job of keeping out blatantly fake apps, especially of horribly popular apps like WhatsApp, you would think with all that machine learning they've got in there, they could maybe apply a little bit of it to, some sort of image recognition for something that's clearly, like a trademark, like the WhatsApp logo. You think you would be able to figure that out.
And this has been a problem, as John was saying. This is something that is just wrong with the Android App Store. Like, it's been referred to as a godless hellscape in more than one occasion. And if you start to look at what the Apple market is like compared to that one, they have a much stricter vetting process on their applications, and that seems to help somewhat.
Well, some people will argue it's almost too far on the extreme side, where Apple has removed apps that really there was no real need to remove them. So Apple can have a bit of a heavy hand, but I think, and there has been research in the past. I remember a couple of years ago we discussed something where researchers were able to have some sort of effectively like a very much like a polymorphic app that was essentially malware, and they were able to get it onto the App Store and get it approved, right? So it's not that it's impossible to get malware onto the App Store, but the occurrence of it is very low. So that's one of the big issues with the Android ecosystem right now, and things like this certainly don't help. WhatsApp has 400 million users or more, some crazy number of users. It's got, I think, probably like 500-600 million. So I know 1 million isn't really a big number in that, but when you're distributing like random malware, 1 million is a pretty damn good number for propagation for you, right? So yeah. Okay, next. I really like this. Anyone who even slightly follows any of my political leanings knows that I really, really enjoy reading something like this, just the headline alone. But it does bring up some interesting points. So someone at Twitter inadvertently deactivated Donald Trump's account for 11 minutes. Oh my God, Donald Trump couldn't tweet for 11 minutes.
What did his tiny hands do?
I don't know. Just watch some more Fox News. But anyways. So essentially, so what Twitter is claiming happened, and like little bits and little more details are coming out kind of moment by moment. So initially, Twitter had said outright that it was an employee who did this, and it was their last day, and they were apparently just like, fuck it, I'm gonna shut down Donald. Peace, I'm out. See you guys later. Now they're saying it was a contractor, or I'm hearing things about it being a contractor. Either way, it brings up some really sort of scary things about how Twitter operates. So when you have someone like Donald Trump, and you do have other world leaders who don't necessarily conduct themselves in the same way on Twitter, other world leaders tend to sort of, just have like sort of official sort of canned, someone wrote this tweet for me so that it looks good. However, there's a lot of companies that use Twitter for, very important stuff. Twitter gets used for information sharing during, like protests and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of use for Twitter. The thing is, if one person, even a contractor, has the ability to just arbitrarily deactivate an account, especially like a priority account like the current president of the United States, which regardless of who it is, I think that's probably something you want to have like extra controls on. The fact that they can just go and do that is a little scary. It kind of makes you wonder what else they're capable of doing at Twitter. And yeah, I mean, Twitter, as much as I use Twitter and I'm hopelessly addicted to it, it is a giant dumpster fire, like without a doubt, in many, many, many ways.
Fun to watch.
Hmm?
Fun to watch.
Sure.
It is fun to watch. I mean, that's part of the addiction, right? Is that Twitter, some of the craziness on Twitter is quite fun. And InfoSec has a pretty good sort of run on Twitter going.
Some of the discussion on this one, though, was fairly interesting. There are a lot of services that do have a sort of special tier of people that are high risk or high value, and they put on all kinds of extra protections on them just to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen.
So look what Google's just done with their Google Advanced Protection, right? Where they've sent out, they've specifically identified people who are increased risk to being targeted by advanced attackers like journalists and that sort of stuff, and they've sent them out physical. Two-factor dongles, and they've added extra layers of security to their account. Why the hell doesn't Twitter have something like that when it comes to actions taken on an account? Now, that being said, in terms of deactivating an account, I wonder, because there's been some stuff about Google that I actually don't even have in the headlines, but things like they've been taking down people's private Google documents for terms of service violations, but the documents were not shared publicly, they weren't spammed. They're banning based on content.
Yes, machine learning and content.
So Google is capable of doing that, and that's without human oversight. So even better. It's kind of interesting. It'll be interesting to see what Twitter actually does in terms of any real changes, but they've sort of already given themselves an out by essentially saying, well, yeah, so we're not going to actually tell you what we're changing. We're just going to say we're going to make security changes, and it's going to prevent this from ever happening. So I wonder if they'll just give they'll have one guy who's been there for a while, and just gonna be like, hey, you're the only guy who can touch Donald Trump's account, and then everyone else is still screwed. Yeah, that's their solution. That seems like a very Twitter solution to me. Okay, so another ransomware outbreak. At some point, I'm going to get really sick about talking about these. And yeah, it wasn't really, it certainly wasn't an outbreak on the scale of WannaCry by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think the reach was nearly as bad. And it was certainly, the spread was primarily contained to Russia and Ukraine. There wasn't much outside of that. And because it was using
At this point, ransomware uses sort of someone getting murdered in Scarborough or something. It's just another thing.
well, okay. I'm gonna ignore the fact that we're trying to imply that Scarborough anywhere in Canada is actually genuinely dangerous compared to other places, because it's not. But I'll ignore that. I'm not going to dive into that. But the thing is, someone actually pointed out really rightfully on Twitter, in my opinion, that basically ransomware is just another piece of malware. It's just malware. Yes, it does something slightly differently. It has had a bit more impact as of late, but it's sort of the new hot thing in malware, and we still have to deal with malware. We have to deal with the fact that it's getting onto your system in the first place, and yeah.
There's a couple of things that are different. The economics of ransomware.
Well, I'm sure that's why it's such a go-to these days, right?
Profitable.
I'm sure the people are paying it. There was an article I was thinking of including. I can't remember who did the study, but there was a couple days ago they released up. Yeah, 41% of people are paying the ransom. So, and if you think about it, I mean, if you think of when people are doing large phishing campaigns, those ridiculous spam emails where everything's misspelled and horrible, right? They're only looking for a couple idiots to hit that. Well, yes, because they're looking for the most gullible. Yes, they're looking for the absolute most gullible. But they only need a couple people, right, to get a payoff.
Well, to me, the most interesting thing about ransomware over the other malware is the services that offer you dashboards and They will help you set up your own
But
plan.
that stuff's been around for
I
other
know.
stuff for a long time too. That is not so like all of this. They've just taken something that's it's now more profitable for them to do this because a lot of times they're asking for small amounts of money.
Startup culture around ransomware.
Yeah. Well, but it's the same thing when if you look at copyright enforcement. I know this seems like a weird tangent, but wait for it. So when it came to copyright enforcement, when like Napster and everything was this big thing, and Metallica was getting all pissed off that people were downloading songs for free, and well, back then people did, right? But at that point, the RIAA and the MPAA in the U.S. were going after people for like these like multi-million-dollar settlements. They were saying like each song on your computer is worth like $120,000 worth of copyright infringement, et cetera, right? And they would pursue like a couple of these, thinking that that was going to be a good deterrent. Well, then what happened was some law firms shifted their tactics, and they started going for low dollar amount and just getting people to settle, right? Basically saying, hey, pay us $5,000 now, and we're not going to go through any other court proceedings. We're not going to take you for the money we could take you for, which is this crazy $1 million amount. And they found huge success with that. So this is the thing with ransomware, especially on an individual level. They're asking for like $350 to get all of your unbacked up photos and everything back, right? Like for some people, it's like their whole life on their computer, right? Their kids, their kids' photos, from like when their kid was born, taking their first steps, etc., and they're all like locked up until you pay $350. $350 seems pretty cheap for that, right?
No one's never gonna 3, 2, 1 back up the phone.
Yeah.
Or even like get the storage that recovery. Like people always think, oh, my hard drives have died. How do I replace them? It's like, oh, you need like at least $1,000 to go to like some storage.
Depends on how badly they fail, but yeah, like quite frequently it gets really, really expensive, and that's if they can even do it.
Well, the good thing is about that, some places, even the really expensive ones, they only charge you
If they get data back. Yeah.
Mike.
41% paying ransom seems ridiculously high, especially with the rate of like, people who don't barely even know how to use a computer to, purchase cryptocurrency and pay a ransom.
Well, but that's why these guys offer customer support to help you through that process. Not the ransomware guys do.
To his point, he's got a point on something that I want to
Yeah.
call out. Sorry, I'm not sure if I
Yeah,
want
absolutely. It's an open discussion.
One
Yep.
of the things that I want people to think critically about is what is the methodology for all these stats that are out there.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And yeah, it's 41% paid out of home. And who asked
Yeah.
that question?
And what's the company that published the study? Because I'm pretty sure they probably have a hand in some sort of ransomware defense. I would wager.
Because like even if like when these ransomware outbreaks happen, a lot of people track the Bitcoin wallets
Yeah.
that are made available, right? And
But that's for large scale outbreaks though, right? That's for
Absolutely.
where we don't necessarily hear about the fact that there's like this slow burn of just home users that they wanted to download something for free. It's usually how it happens, right? You're trying to pirate stuff, and they go and they download something, some sort of keygen or something like that,
Which makes sense.
like our wonderful NSA contractor friend.
Kind of brings it back to the point is like, how does anyone even know, the frequency of pays those small bleeding like little campaigns, right?
Yeah.
Like you could probably see the best sampling probably from a major outbreak.
Yeah, but I mean, these guys they try to make it as simple as possible for you to get them their money.
Oh, for sure. I've seen them. They're like.
They literally, some of them have literally set up like 1-800 support lines for this stuff. I'm not even kidding. It's happened.
Regarding that, so do you know like anything about this survey? Was it like
I just saw it very briefly in some headlines today. I haven't even had a chance to go through it. So
Because I'm thinking maybe it's like, touching on your point, Mike, maybe they're like asking people like, would you pay? And it's like 31% of people would pay for
well,
ransom.
the language was are paid,
Okay, so they probably
as in they have conducted this in such a way that people have given an answer and said, I have paid ransom to unlock my funds.
Yeah, because to me the problem is like how many people they ask for what reasons, like
Yeah.
your normal.
Well, yeah, methodology is very important, right?
WannaCry or something like that, or
quoting someone else, it's not me. I think that
Yeah.
people know about the Scientia Institute, Wade Baker and Jay Jacobs.
No.
Have you heard of them? Okay, so these are a couple of guys. They were involved with the Verizon data breach report. Like
Okay.
when it first came out.
Yeah. When it was still really good.
It's still
It's still decent.
It's still very, 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 very good.
They've had a couple misses though.
Yeah, like their own breach.
Different teams.
Yeah, whole different thing.
But the fact is, Wade and Jay have they started this place called the Scientia Institute,
Yeah.
Scientia, and they are putting together like a collection of data around these kinds of surveys and stuff like that.
Nice.
So keep an eye out for what they're doing. I think they were doing something around ransomware. I don't remember.
Nice. We can always use more like good data analysis so we know what to target.
They're very much looking to do a better job.
Good.
Of
Because right now most of it's fueled by marketing, right? A huge chunk of it's fueled by marketing, right? So.
Survey was from University of Kent.
Oh, okay. So, in funded by who?
John McCaffrey.
Well, then it's fine because he doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Oh, this
John McAfee doesn't care anymore. This was sort of interesting. So someone found a USB stick in West London that contained extremely detailed security information on Heathrow Airport, including things like the path that the Queen will take if she goes through Heathrow,
Okay.
which is pretty intense information.
Yep.
Was the USB drive encrypted? Were there passwords on anything? No.
I once received an email randomly, and it was a chain for the schematics for the baggage handling system at a Texas airport. And I told them to stop sending the email, and they kept sending me schematics.
Like, dude, come on, schematics. You're in on it.
I'm just like, I don't work here.
And you're like, I should probably not go to Texas anytime soon.
Yeah.
Was this actually verified that this is real intel? Because that could have easily have just been someone saying, oh, hey, look at all this super secret documentation, like, and plug this random USB in.
could have been a hoax.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been, but stranger things have happened. In Canada, for example, we had someone who worked for ISSSes, I believe it was, left a trove of documents on the passenger seat of their car during a Blue Jays game, and it was stolen.
But that seems a little more practical than, the Queen's, like travel.
Well, it was Heathrow's security data, right? Well, like, think of, that NSA security contractor that's involved in this whole Kaspersky thing, right? They had a USB drive, very likely, that they took all that wonderful NSA malware home on, right? And what if it fell out of their pocket? You just stick it in your pocket, you got your keys in there too, all sorts of other stuff. You pull out your keys, it falls out, you don't even notice, right? It could happen.
I'm still a little upset. So the fact that
Maybe they were distraught. I don't know. There's nothing wrong with being suspicious, but generally the register tries to vet their stuff before they start talking about it, right?
still, people are picking up these USB sticks and still plugging them in, which is fantastic.
And an airport, so the airport's spokesperson has basically said, we've launched an internal investigation. So, the fact that they're even coming out and sort of saying, hey, yeah, we're looking into this means, it's something at least.
So clearly, they can just plug in random USBs that aren't encrypted and do whatever.
Yeah, but a lot of companies you can do that.
Yeah,
It's not going to work for GDPR, very sure.
All right, next, what do we got? Okay, so Amazon Key.
all this stupid.
Okay, so I want to come out. I'm just going to come out. I'm going to say this right now. And there were a couple people on Twitter I'm basically stealing this from. But to me personally, this is not an InfoSec problem specifically, in any way, shape, or form. Yes, you would be relying on Amazon's technology to sort of protect you. Not purely Amazon's technology, but you'd have an Amazon camera, which is broadcasting to their cloud 24/7. So yeah, there is that technical security part of it. There's also the smart lock, and there's been a lot of research done on smart locks over the last couple DEF CONs and Black Hats. In terms of basically just fuzzing the crap out of their Bluetooth stack and that kind of stuff, as well as looking for sort of more logical issues. But the main issue is the fact that you are willfully permitting some random delivery guy to enter your home. And I mean, if you've seen the way that some of these guys treat packages in general, I don't know if I would really like, I just don't want some random person entering my home, you know, even though I know I have a delivery coming. Yeah, there's a camera, but.
Well, the thing is, yeah, they won't steal anything, but they could be casing the place.
Oh, of course. And then come back later and steal everything.
Another good idea that I heard is like have Amazon like bin with the same idea on there. That they could just like throw it in.
They were like past decade they've had boxes where you could have them drop stuff into the box and you
Yep.
open them without the key. So
Yeah.
I don't understand why you need
More than just a mailbox though.
I don't know. Like it just seems like a completely unnecessary thing.
Can I be contrarian?
Yes, go right ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We love contrarians.
We're forgetting that this is that. So what's the alternative? The alternative is you don't get your package. The alternative is you have to be home to get your package.
Or it goes to
Or
the
something,
post.
yeah.
Or you have to go to the post office, which has a cost to you. So
True.
Someone is going to evaluate that the cost of messing up their day, going to the post office to pick it up, on aggregate, it's less to let Amazon come in.
Yep.
No,
it's convenience. Convenience.
Which is a valid cost.
Absolutely.
It's a valid
I agree.
economic, rational decision. I mean, it's a different trade model.
I would say this is very much an InfoSec thing, because physical security is an InfoSec thing.
But the security of your home, like when I say it's not an InfoSec thing, as in, you know, this is a discussion you could have with just any random people. This is not a discussion explicitly, you know.
Yeah,
But the concepts are still extrapolated, right? Like, let's say you're an enterprise and you have a managed service
Well,
agreement.
sure, you can extrapolate.
And you have a managed service provider agreement, you know, some sort of company who has, you know, third-party remote access into your network. That's, you essentially don't know who is on the other side of that. You are entrusting a company to come into your network willfully, but you have controls and mechanisms in place like this smart lock and the camera. So it's exactly the same issue. It's just mainstream and it's in everyone's faces. Right?
Well, I would say it's a good analogy. It's a valid analogy, but at the same time, in terms of the players involved, you have a giant, huge company, and then you have average person who just wants convenience and isn't necessarily equipped to evaluate any risks involved in this, right?
Well, no,
They're just gonna say, "Hey, this is convenient. I'm all in."
There
right?
needs to be some sort of like risk tolerance there, or like
Yeah.
acceptability, right, on the end user. Because what one person may find convenient, I may find that risk is too great. I don't
Yeah.
want that to happen.
And that's the thing is that people, like if you think of how much people share with Facebook, Google, et cetera, they don't understand necessarily the risks behind that. I don't know if they're necessarily going to understand, any of the potential risks apart from letting someone into your house, which everyone kind of knows, right?
Who here doesn't take Uber every now and then? Right? You get into a car with a stranger
Yep.
that you booked over an app.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And to me, the risk profile of getting into an Uber is worse than the Amazon key stuff. That
Oh,
someone
yeah.
is-
Absolutely, especially because drivers are horrible.
Well,
Cab drivers go through certifications, though, right? Like they are actually still like.
Well, they get a driver's license, like Uber drivers do.
Yes, but they don't have that criminal record checks in most places, but Uber drivers do.
Well,
Well, you order a pizza from Domino's, you don't know if this guy's a psychopath.
They're doing what it-
I don't have him enter into my house, but
You're not there.
I don't give him a code to my smart lock and let him in the door, right?
I guess it depends on your.
Depends on the lock. Yeah.
the camera faces the door,
Yeah.
you get notified. Yeah, it's an unusual service. but
Yeah.
I don't think it's that much of a stretch from what we can now.
No,
It
no.
made enough sense to Amazon that they proposed it.
What lens you look at it through. So if I'm looking at it through, I'm letting someone unlock my door when I'm not there. Yeah, but if you look at it in terms of like like if you look at a pizza delivery, which someone mentioned
Yeah, yeah.
where it's like the same thing. Random guy in a random car you don't know is coming to your house. He knows your
But I'm
address.
there to receive the pizza.
But having also, another point of the security aspect is having just one lock to like rule them all kind of thing. If there's ever a vulnerability,
You can
in the
actually-
lock,
But
you
let's
get
not
the lock
pretend
after.
that your actual door locks are really anything more than an
Let's
inconvenience.
I know,
pretend
but
that like
Let's be honest.
Every-
Many of you have done lock picking. Many of you understand locks are fairly trivial to defeat in general.
Yeah, but if you can do it remotely.
For Amazon, I think the biggest issue for them and their customers was the fact that people were having their packages stolen off their.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
And also, I'm surprised there's not more people using SOC positions at MSSPs to case networks.
Look, as far as optional services go, this is one of them. On the side, taxi drivers wanted cash paid daily vehicle supplied year-round boss. Heading into the very busy season, must not be over 25 and have 3 years of consecutive personal insurance. There you go.
That's
Wanna
it.
Drive a taxi? You do.
No, and it doesn't even say must pass criminal background check. Does not say that. Anyways.
this is a very valid service, though. I have to agree.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not valid. I'm just saying I would never do it.
There was just a lot of hot takes about this
I'm
one.
saying is like, do we know what the control mechanisms Amazon is putting in? Because what happens when
They've
someone-
described it.
What happens when someone enters your domicile? Who's liable for that person?
They are.
So that if that person
They're
enters your
liable.
domicile, breaks their leg because you left something in the way of the door path.
Yeah.
That's their work insurance covers that.
Okay, so
They also
there's,
can't move the
different
dwelling
things
house.
outside of security risks, right? Like
Yeah.
liabilities and all that stuff.
Yeah, like so liability is like if you're not there and someone hurts himself in your house, unless it's due to your negligence, because negligence is a whole other thing, right? But generally their work insurance. It's their issue on the job, it's their employer's job to cover that liability, right?
And considering that a lot of the people who would use a service like this are probably going to have some kind of smart, camera or something like that, or a smart doorbell or something that like.
Well, the camera is part of this whole thing. You're required to have the Amazon
Like,
camera as
like
part
in
of this.
addition to that,
Oh,
so
okay.
people already
Yeah.
have like pre-existing. security.
Probably, yeah. I mean, you're generally going to have fairly tech-savvy people that are using this service
Yeah.
anyways, right?
So-
And people who just love embracing future technology and super lazy.
And that's Amazon. That's what they cater to.
All right.
It's next on the list.
Okay, this is just a little one. So I don't know if any of you guys who are sort of familiar with Oracle's basically the way that Oracle does patches, unlike Microsoft, which does every month on every Tuesday, Oracle does quarterly patches. And usually when they would do a quarterly patch dump, we're usually talking 200 plus CVEs, crazy array of products. And when we go through this at work, because we have to, unfortunately, when we go through this at work, there's products that I didn't know existed and that I feel like there's probably 10 customers for in the entire world. Like, they have an entire suite of products just covering, like, cruise ship management.
What?
Yeah, seriously. And I looked up on Wikipedia, and I think there's actually, like, 10 cruise lines in the world. Like, major cruise lines. There might be some small ones, but they're not going to need, like, cruise line fleet management and stuff like that. But Oracle's got a product for it. So Oracle has products for basically everything. Most of them are just slightly reworked, or some of the algorithms and some of the number crunching is modified from their other products to be more correct for this business. But anyways, so for the first time in a long time, I can't remember the last time Oracle did this. It probably wasn't that long ago, but Oracle actually released an emergency patch out of band for quite possibly the stupidest thing ever. So I don't know if there's not a lot of on the news sites, it's not necessarily getting talked about, but if you go on Twitter and you search for about 5 seconds, you'll find out exactly what this vulnerability is. And it's basically a default account with full admin privileges that has a password of space. Just a space character. Yep.
It's featured.
Yeah.
Featured.
So and it's literally so they rated this like a CVSS 10, which is reserved for root level unauthenticated remote code execution, right? So they're basically saying, so yeah, if you got access to this account by entering space as the password, you'd have full access to the whole system. So yeah, we're gonna do an out-of-band patch for this. And initially it wasn't even a patch, it was a workaround, which was literally remove this account. But now they're actually pushing out a patch.
How are they
Yeah.
a company?
Like
It's this
They sue everybody.
because they cover all those ridiculous niches, and
Well, I think
there
they
aren't
just
that many.
built Solaris edition.
There might be other companies, like small companies that have like 2 programmers and maybe make something for this, but big companies want to go with other big companies, so they have someone to blame when stuff goes wrong.
Away from Oracle, but the cost from switching away
Yeah.
from Oracle to something open source is just astronomical.
Yeah.
because of how
One and
integrated
open source
Yeah.
is such a rough thing.
It's not that
lower cost provider.
Yeah, it's not that the costs are, it's that the Oracle did something really smart, and right, we can talk about it later. But they the third-party applications that only certify on Oracle, right? So okay, you don't Oracle has a cruise management ship software. Okay, fine, that's one. There's a couple of other companies that, by the way, where do you run? Oh, we run on top of Oracle, which means that if you want to run my service, you have to buy an Oracle database.
Yeah, but that's the
the
problem
Apple
with AS400 too. You're trying to move away from AS400. Everything's so integrated into that ancient archaic system, it's almost impossible to move away from.
But yeah, so that was just a quick one.
Enterprise technology.
And this is like the nightmare of all vulnerabilities to find, and thank goodness it was a researcher that found it. But basically, a hobbyist, bug bounty researcher, he basically found a way to get access to Google's internal issue tracker, and which essentially gave him visibility on unfixed externally facing vulnerabilities in Google's products.
Yeah.
So that is like the ultimate nightmare of externally facing flaws. And essentially what happened was that he would go in, he would register his account for the bug tracker, because anyone can register, but the visibility on issues is restricted if you're not a Google employee, right? How would you think they would verify a Google employee?
Is it the email job?
Email, google.com email, right? So if you have a google.com email address, you're a Google employee. Gmail.com obviously is. So essentially what he did is he would go in, he would create an account, it would send him the email verification email. He wouldn't click on it yet, but he'd go into his account and he'd change his email to something at google.com. Then he would go back and click the confirm email. It would confirm it. And in he was with a google.com email address, confirmed account and everything, and he could just go through and browse. Yeah, it's a little scary that something that it sounds trivial, but it's not necessarily something that everyone's going to go on trial all the time, right? But
3 bugs in total. I think they patched one within the hour. Thankfully, they were pretty quick on it once they actually got word.
Yeah.
Shitsy for a reward.
15 grand?
So basically a map saying, here's how to break it here, here, and here.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The thing is, bug bounties always pay less than gray market or black market.
Great segue.
Yeah, like always. Which, now we're actually going to talk about something very, very heavily related to that. So, are you guys familiar with Pwn to Own at all? So, Pwn to Own is basically a contest held by 0 Day Initiative, which is owned by Trend Micro. And essentially what they do is they basically say, okay, we're going to have like a 2-day contest, and here's the targets that we're going to have. So sometimes it's browsers, operating systems. This one specifically was mobile Pwn to Own. So it was specifically mobile device targets. And it's generally, we're not targeting apps specifically here with the exception of mobile browsers. They're generally targeting full operating system. So unsurprisingly, basically every single mobile platform up there. So they had Galaxy S8, they had iPhone 7. From what I recall, they had, I think it was, yeah. What did they have too? I can never pronounce that. Huawei. So the Huawei Mate 9 Pro. So like all in all, they gave out a total of 515 grand to researchers. Now, so there's a number of things that we can really start to discuss here. So first things first, when people start to see things like this, you will always start to see people saying, well, clearly this means that this platform is better, or clearly that means that this platform is better, which is the stupidest thing ever. You're not going to determine the overall security of a mobile platform by the existence of vulnerabilities, because there's always going to be vulnerabilities. They're always going to be there. As long as humans are writing software, we're going to have flaws, whether they're logical or someone made a coding error, or I think it was that Apple one that we talked about with the encrypted volumes, where it was showing the actual password for the password hint. That was literally very clearly, someone analyzed the patch for it, and someone said this was very clearly a paste error. Someone had pasted code and not changed what they needed to change. And it was very, very obvious from the patch that was the case, right? So, we have humans who, are bound to make mistakes now and again, who are writing code for this stuff. So, sort of claiming that, oh, hey, I found this one vulnerability or one chain of vulnerabilities that let me, remotely root a phone, doesn't necessarily mean that platform itself is bad. So that's kind of the first bit. However, the other thing you have to kind of keep in mind with these is that these are professional research teams that, for the most part, there are exceptions to this. There was one guy who I think was solo this time, Amat Kama, goes by the handle ISSessions. So he was flying solo, which is generally quite rare. So if you're a solo vulnerability researcher and you get to the point of this, and if you think historically about things like past jailbreaks, people who have found out ways to root their Android phones with locked or unlocked bootloaders and things like that, individual researchers can make headway doing this. It's not impossible. It doesn't cost $200,000 or $500,000 to find one of these vulnerabilities. But it sure helps when you're being paid to do it.
Yeah.
And it's your job, and you can spend 40 hours a week just hammering away at this stuff because that's literally your job, right?
And for this one in particular, this competition, they get advanced warning about all the targets, and they spend weeks, months ahead of time. Right?
But what they don't get the patches that get it. So there was patches were released for both Android and iOS on November 1st, the day before they started this contest.
So
there was one or two attempts that had to withdraw because they're pretty sure that something got patched. Yeah. Or at the very least, something was changed that, their exploit chain didn't quite work as intended, right? But this is the thing. Yeah, I mean, these guys are constantly researching this stuff. And you will notice also there's a pretty heavy representation from China.
Yep.
In all honesty, I don't know of major firms outside of China that are, other than Google, that are large-scale funding zero-day research. Google being, as far as I know, the only real exception. And I'm not talking like, hey, they have one or two guys that are doing zero-day research. But like they have massive teams. Like typically, I think it's, I'm trying to remember which, I don't think it was the MWR Labs guys, but Tencent. So Tencent has several security teams that all do zero-day research, and they typically send multiple teams to these pwn to own. So, and again, these guys are only doing zero-day research. They're incredibly skilled. They know what the hell they're doing.
They came back with $250,000, so it couldn't have been that bad.
Yeah, and they typically apparently get to keep it because they're already getting paid more than that anyways. From the rumors that I've understood is that they're getting paid enough. But anyways, so what it kind of comes down to, you look at the money, you think, okay, that seems like a lot of money. But if you look at, you have guys like, I think it's Zerodium.
For sure.
I'm not the biggest fan of Mr. Beckerer, just from an ethical standpoint. But they offer like $1 million for a full remote exploit chain. So this, these guys, 2 successful attacks against the iPhone 7 got them $250,000 versus one of those sold to Zerodium would potentially be worth $1 million. So clearly the money is not the issue for those particular guys, but the question is, what is the motivation? Anybody have a guess? And motivation behind doing the vulnerability research for bug bounty purposes like this, for a security team.
It's an economic signal.
Yeah.
That, hey, we're good. So, for example, Kiwu, like, they need to have an endpoint product, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, they do.
Right? Hey, our guys do this. And
Yep.
Trend Micro sponsors this because VDI gets 50% of the 0 days in the world get announced through VDI.
Yep. Yeah, one of my friends actually works for ZDI doing verification of incoming issues, right? And they get a lot of stuff. It's kind of intense because they help. The thing is, ZDI does help mediate, between vendors and things like that. It doesn't always work out that well, but they assist with the process and they do take on some of the risk for the researchers. But yeah, for these guys, it's almost explicitly because it makes their companies look good. It directly makes them nothing, and in fact, surely costs them more money than they bring in bounties, because these guys are paid amazing salaries, and there's usually large teams of them, and that probably covers one guy's salary maybe for the year, that $255,000, right? Never mind the entire team, and never mind for multiple years at a time. So yeah, that part of it's kind of, I always find that fascinating that, they haven't sort of, those offers of here's $1 million for one exploit chain, and you have the skill to possibly go and get more, that hasn't been more of a thing. Now, that being said, Zerodium doesn't exactly disclose when they've, paid out something like that. So that's the other part, is that whole gray market of vulnerability sales. I'm not a huge fan of, simply because it's very murky in terms of, what do they have, who are they selling it to, the people they sell it to, what are they actually using it for versus what they say they're using it for. And we've seen, obviously in the last year or two, we've seen, full-on zero-day exploit chains used against, like dissidents in, oppressive regimes and stuff like that. So I think that's always a bit of a concern.
And if the gray market's going to give you the $1 million, you really got to start to worry about what they're actually getting for it and who they're actually.
Well, exactly. So they wouldn't pay $1 million unless they were going to make a pretty sizable profit back on that, right? They're not going to pay it $1 million so that they can sell it to like one guy for $500,000. They're going to buy it for $1 million because they can make 50 on it, right? Maybe not that much, but they got to make profit, right? That's how their business works. But yeah, that's basically about it. We didn't have anything that was terribly deep this week. This was, I think, about the most interesting of it. But yeah, these Pwn2Own competitions, they usually have one sort of regular one every year, and the mobile one, I think, just started back up again this year. I think it had been on hold for a little while. Yeah, at CanSec West in Vancouver, typically. Yeah. So there's been some issues over the past little while with all the like Wassenaar stuff and, carrying exploits over borders and things like that. But that's a whole other thing. But anyways, so yeah, all the phones fell basically. You'll see some discussion on Twitter. Some people are saying, oh, well, this totally proves Android. There was one exploit chain that was 11 vulnerabilities across 6 different applications.
Pretty good.
That's pretty nuts. I would love to see a write-up on that and spend like a month reading it, trying to understand it. But yeah, so like they total of 32 vulnerabilities. So the interesting thing also is that these guys are sitting on these until the competition. Yep. Like almost all the research is done beforehand. Payloads are constructed, exploit chains are constructed. So they're sitting on these. Yeah. And they wait until, hey, we can go to a competition because it makes them look good.
Yeah, that's the misleading part. They say it happens in 2 days, but they're entirely prepared. They just have to demo.
Well, yeah, you always get those articles that come out at especially like the browser or Pwn2Own and something that says, Google Chrome. There was a sandbox escape from Google Chrome in 15 seconds. It's like, yeah, after like a year of research. So anyways,
Yeah.
I guess that about wraps it up for the news. So we'll take a little 5-minute break here, and then we'll let Fernando take over. All right. On by like Uber for a little while. It wasn't to work on Uber's back end because they're car hackers, right? So they were brought in to, do work on securing self-driving car technology. Because I mean, there's even simple things like like denial of service through, or not even denial of service, but causing something reckless by just mucking up a stop sign or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or shining something at a sensor,
Yeah,
right?
spray painting and shit. Yeah.
Right? So, there's a lot of need for like InfoSec has to be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely mandatory.
And it's especially interesting because they're assuming full liability.
Are they really?
Yeah, it's all on them. Like, and they're like, any fuck ups is completely on us.
Well, so an interesting conversation that I saw starting to take place was people talking about, so when self-driving cars are more prevalent, and you have, like you do now, you have luxury cars and you have like domestic cars. Are the luxury cars going to make different decisions in the whole, sort of like the trolley problem, right?
Right, yeah.
Like, would I drive off a cliff if it saves 10 lives?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a Mercedes, it'll just plow through the 10 people. If it's a Honda, it'll go off the cliff.
That's
This
a
is
good
what
point,
people
yeah.
were sort of saying, right? Like, cars for poor people will just be more likely to kill
the
them,
driver,
the
whereas a
driver.
luxury car
Whereas
would-
luxury cars, well, this person's more valuable because they can afford an
To
expensive
society.
car, right? It's an interesting discussion to have, actually.
That's actually, I haven't seen anything.
I saw
about
that brewing on Twitter this week at one point.
Yeah, I didn't see that. That's interesting. I
There's
saw a
one
lot of
company
like,
that already confirmed that they're gonna save the driver over.
Really?
well, yeah, which makes
Over the
sense.
people?
But
Cool.
How long
All right.
do I have?
Invest in video games.
As long as you want. Seriously. Technically we're in the room till 9. But again, there's no rush at all. So literally take notes.
I'm not.
All right, guys. So this is Fernando Montenegro. He's going to be talking about the economics of cybersecurity, which actually ties in really well to some of our conversations that we've been having tonight, because he's going to talk about some, pretty cool stuff, motivation, all that sort of stuff. And so take it away. That's not mine.
Okay, timers are working. Yes. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I don't know where to start because on one hand, it's been a while since I was in your shoes as a student. We'll talk later about where I came from and whatnot. But I find that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak. And this is not a technical talk. I've seen that, I think the past session you guys had, you had Aaron talking about the OWASP 11 Plus and stuff like that. I saw his talk at Task a couple of weeks ago. I loved it. I understand it, but my content is not as technical, right? I'm primarily I come from more of a network background. I understand, I can write some Python, I can write some R. I try to understand assembly, I can't. So a little less technical than your typical talk, but a little bit about me. And by the way, this is a presentation I've done a couple of times. I've updated a few things, and because this is more of a relaxed environment, I'm free to take this like wherever you want to go. There's a couple of things I can go off script here. But the thing I wanted to cover is that I'm now an industry analyst, right? So I'm one of those people who writes reports about vendors and talk about major trends in industry and stuff like that. When I got into I got the economics bug for this stuff. I was a sales engineer at a number of vendors, and that led me to understanding a little bit more about motivation. And when I say motivation is why do people do stuff, right? And that led down to the whole economics thing. Before that, I've been in industry for way too long. I've done professional services, I've done operations, architecture, take a pick. And my degree is from back in 1994, and the joke I always like to tell, the joke itself is getting old, is that my degree is now old enough to drink, right? That's I'm extremely curious. I like economics, I like finance, I like data science. Makes for interesting time management challenges. One comment off script I want to make is that back in college in Brazil, so I'm originally from Brazil, one of the most interesting courses we had was when a professor would bring in people from industry to come to talk to the students about stuff, kind of like what we're doing here. So I may sound even emotional because I really appreciate the opportunity to give back. And if you have questions about anything, throw my way, and we can talk about after the presentation whatnot. This is an industry that it's been very good to me, and it's an industry that I think that we all need. And I want you to help you be successful in it and teach you what the reality of that industry is. Which brings us to this presentation, right? Does anybody know what this movie is? Has anybody seen this movie? The Untouchables, one of the masterpiece. Yeah, there's about I don't know 30%, 20% of the audience.
Shows how old we are.
What's that? Exactly. Okay, this movie came out on June 3rd, 1987, right? And it blows my mind. And fantastic movie. That's probably what got Sean Connery back. What got his career back, kind of thing. And there is one line in this movie that actually apparently has been traced back to this movie that I think summarizes what I want to talk about. And the line is when Sean Connery is he was a cop and he was talking to somebody goes to his house trying to murder him, and the guy pulls out a knife and he pulls out a gun And he says, hey, just like whatever, to bring a knife to a gunfight. Right? That was, if you use the expression, bringing a knife to a gunfight, that's where it came from. And I think it speaks to a lot of what we're doing, because in security, a lot of what we talk about, sometimes we're bringing knives to gunfights. And the reason for that is that we sometimes fail to realize that information security is a multidisciplinary field, right? And there is, of course, information technology. There is all the coding. There is all the operational aspects. I've installed way too many Linux versions to count, and Windows and AS400s, and take a pick, right? There is an element of psychology in security about how you do user interaction, etc. There is, of course, statistics and data science, right? Especially as we go into this much broader field, there's much broader data sets and whatnot. There is notions of product design, there is law, there is even epidemiology, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Math goes without saying, and a bunch of other things. And one of the most important ones, in my opinion, is economics. Why economics is important? And economics, there's a couple of different tracks in it, but economics is about studying scarcity. And one thing that we realize that there is tremendous scarcity within security, and we'll get to that in a second. Before we jump too much further, there's this quote that I found the other day that I like. That an economist is a man who states the obvious in terms of the incomprehensible, right? And I think so a lot of this stuff is common sense. And if you start to look into the actual economics papers, there's lots of complicated math there, which is, oh, by the way, but this is all common sense. So to a large extent, this is, right? So, but bear with me in what we're doing here. Now, I mentioned there's a couple of areas of economics. The one that I think is more relevant for security is microeconomics, right? There's anybody here has taken econ in classes in, okay, so I apologize in advance. You probably know.
It's okay, it was like 15 years ago.
You probably know more about it than I do. My classes were longer than 15 years ago. And microeconomics is fundamentally, like I said, the study of scarcity, the study of individual players in a market, right? That's why I have a picture of a market there. And it studies what people do under scarcity. And in this case, the scarcity we're talking about, it could be resources, could be money, it could be information. You don't know, you don't have enough information to make a decision. And in the context of security, it could be attention, right? People are not paying attention. What do they do when they don't pay attention, right? There's a couple of subtopics about microeconomics that I find fascinating. Information economics is one, decision and game theory being the other, because they help you understand how people behave or how entities behave in a scenario of low information and repeated games. But one criticism that I've gotten from this talk is that sometimes I go off too theoretical, right? One point, so I changed it a little bit from when some of you may have seen it, and I like to switch a little bit and ask, let's apply it to a practical thing. And the thing is, why software insecurity, right? Economics can help us understand some of that, right? And what I like to present is that on one hand, you have the dynamic of marginal costs, helps explain why software is insecure, and the fact that security is what's called a latent construct, right? A latent construct is something that you can't actually measure, right? It's something that you can only infer from other things. I can measure height. I can't measure love, right? Yeah, security and love, exactly. Anyway, and I may have mentioned before, some of you know this before, I make horrible, horrible jokes, terrible puns.
It's okay, have you met Nick?
You're in good company.
Yeah, anyway, so horrible puns may occur throughout. But let's talk a little bit about marginal cost. There is a quote from George Box, who's a famous statistician, something along the lines of, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Okay, so keep that in mind. This is not a perfect model, but it's a good explanation. But it'll help us understand the point I want to make. This is a marginal cost curve in economics, a highly stylized version. The way to interpret this is as you increase the number of units that you are producing, the marginal cost, in other words, the cost of the last good you're producing, it shifts a little bit. At the beginning, when you only have a few units, the cost per unit is very high, right? That's when you set up your factory in the first place. And that's when you have to hire people and they're not very good at what they're doing yet. So the cost for you to make that first good is expensive. Over time, you get into a groove, and then you're writing out you kind of optimize it a little bit. At some point in time, you start to run out of resources. Maybe your supplier can't meet your demand for raw parts at the price that you agreed. You have to go to somebody else. You have to pay more. Maybe you have to start paying your people overtime to do whatever they're doing. So the marginal cost increases, right? And then the reason I talk about marginal cost is because I won't go through all the details, but fundamentally the marginal cost at some point drives the price that you're able to extract from a good, okay? So this is a marginal cost curve, and there is one detail. This is a marginal cost curve for a physical good. How do you think the marginal cost curve for a digital good looks? Any guesses? You've seen it before. So. Okay. The marginal cost for a software good is radically different, right? And what happens here is that you start off at the very high cost, just like before, but the cost of the next good is much, much cheaper. So, I mean, it never gets down to zero. You still may have a little bit of distribution costs, right? But fundamentally, the cost of the last good is much, much cheaper, which means that this has, notice I'm not talking anything about security here. I'm talking about digital goods and physical goods only. This has a tremendous consequence for security because in a market for information goods, you are in a scenario where you have very high fixed costs and very low marginal costs. Okay? This is pure economics. Again, nothing to do with security. In a market such as this, economics tells us that this is a market prone to monopolies. Because if the cost of the good that you can do is very, very small, if the cost is very small, eventually the price you're going to extract from that you're able to extract will be small as well, which means that the only way you're going to try to get to survive in that market is by growing as fast as you can, being as a monopoly as much as possible, right? You go into a market race. There is a absolute fixation in time to market, getting the minimum viable product out the door as quickly as it's humanly possible, right? So that you can get into a monopolistic position. This is rational economic behavior. And I'll bring it back to security by saying that if we expect companies to behave any different, I'm sorry, but the problem is on us, right? We are bringing knives to gunfights, right? We should not expect people to do anything that's going to go against this dynamic, right? Yes, they could write better software, but if writing better software is going to cost them time to do something, they are not going to do it. And they are not stupid, and they are not evil. They are being rational economic actors. And we should keep that in mind. There's other interesting dynamics as well. One of them is the appeal to complementary goods. That how you survive in a market like this, right? Is that you try to build so that other products need your product. We talked about this just before. Who did that? Microsoft did that. Splunk did that. And by the way, I'm not mentioning company names just by endorsement or anything, just as an example, right? But Microsoft did that. Splunk did that really, really well in the SIM market. Oracle, we were talking about Oracle earlier. They did that very well in the database market, right? And in an appeal to complementary goods, it doesn't help if you make it difficult for people to develop on your platform. So one of the things, I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not, but the fact that writing for Windows in the early 90s, whatever, wasn't as secure. The APIs were not very secure, but that made it easy to write for them, right? So people rode on top of those. There's other things as well. There's network effects and stuff like that, right? The value that you get from buying a product expands as more people use that product and so on. So that's why, for example, a lot of the antivirus vendors and whatnot, they say, hey, listen, you get our product, you have the telemetry from billions of endpoints around the world, and yada, 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 yada. But, so all these things are all about economics. They're not about the fact that people are going to do security just out of the goodness of their hearts. Now, we kind of came to a compromise around, okay, we want to release security quickly, but we don't have enough, we have to move faster. So we came out with patches, right? And we talked about patches before. Patches, in my opinion, are an imperfect compromise because they're talking about how we're going to, it's the time to market versus the software versus the cost. And patches, let me introduce a concept called an externality. Are people familiar with the concept of an economic externality? In economics, an externality is something where the decision about something, you're making an economic decision about something, but you're not bearing the full cost or getting the full benefit of that decision, right? So when a vendor releases a patch, it's very easy for them to, you know what, yeah, we released a patch. But the onus of applying that patch is not on the vendor. The onus of applying that patch is on you as a consumer. Another good example of externalities is usually pollution, right? Somebody pollutes, and then out of pollution, you're not, as you're polluting, you're not paying the full price of that pollution. Society is. And society has come up with a number of different approaches to how you resolve externalities. Those include taxation, those include regulation, those include liability, and so on. We don't have any of those in security, or we're going towards that way. Anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent. So we talk about, so understanding externalities, understanding the dynamic of software goods helps, dynamic of information goods helps us understand a little bit the motivation for security, or the motivation for not being secure. The other point I wanted to talk about is, I talked about that latent constraint, the love aspect, right? There is a fantastic result from economics called information asymmetry, which is how do people behave when they're going to make a transaction and you can't value the quality of something, right? If you ever heard the term a lemon, a market for lemons, in terms of buying a used car, that's the little logo over there. And this was research that led to the Nobel Prize in Economics for George Akerlof and a couple of collaborators. And it talks about how in a market where there is information asymmetry, you are going to make a decision based on the expected value out of that market. If you can't tell if something is really good or something is really bad, you're going to kind of guess halfway, and you're going to, and that's where you're going. And what this means, there's an adverse selection problem, which is if you can't really, if you go for midway, and if I make a good product, but the best price I can get for my product is less, if the halfway between me and the bad product, what incentive do I have to make a good product, right? If all the cost I'm going to have, if all the effort I'm going to go through, I'm not going to be able to recoup that cost because you are comparing me to a crappy or other product, I'm going to be crappy as well, or I'm going to get out of the market. This is an adverse selection problem, right? Can you talk about IoT security in that context? Yes, you can, right? If you can't measure how secure something is, you're just going to do for the minimum you can get away with. Again, from an economic perspective, theoretically we solve information asymmetry? There's two methods. One is called signaling, the other one is called screening. And this is the research that, along with Akerlof, got the Nobel Prize. And it is, signaling is, okay, if I want to tell you that I have better quality, how How do I demonstrate that? Well, I can signal to you that I have better quality. The other way you can resolve that asymmetry is, okay, you don't know if I have good quality. You're going to screen me for good quality. You're going to set up a process by which I can only pass that process if I have the inherent quality that I'm looking for. Well, in our industry, we know them by a couple other names, right? Certifications and RFPs. So the processes that we go through for resolving the information asymmetry, they are all around us, and they explain why there is a need for security certifications. They explain why, if you are working in an industry, you're going to have to either create or respond to a 500-page RFP, request for proposal, right? But anyway, so information asymmetry is a tremendously interesting process. The thing that I like is that I like to think about the market in general, and there's a very, very interesting paper I suggest people read. It's called The Market for Silver Bullets. It came out in 2008 by a guy named Ian Grigg. And in it, he argues that, and without going too much into the details, security goods are not really about, in terms of, when you talk about information asymmetry, there is a problem that is that not only the buyer doesn't know what he's buying, but the seller doesn't know what he's selling, because they can't measure security either. So you end up in a scenario where you get security goods are actually goods of insufficient information. And the behavior that ends up happening in the market is that you have a herding effect, and that people end up going towards buying with what other people are buying. And as you come into this industry, you're going to realize, why does everybody buy that product? Oh, because everybody else is buying it. And that's a rational economic explanation. It might not make, it's not the best answer, but it is rational. And if we expect different, we're going to, again, bringing knives to gunfights. Okay, so I'm trying to introduce a dose of cold water reality into, okay, why are people doing things that seem stupid from a security perspective? Because from an economic perspective, it makes sense. Okay? Now, what do I think we should be doing? We should be blaming developers less. We should not have the unrealistic expectations, right? And what we should be doing more, I think we should understand where these concepts of signaling and screening come in. We should be understanding where the role of industry collaboration comes in, right? I mentioned, like, especially as we talk about regulation and liability, etc. That's a conversation going on right now in industry, and we have to be a part of it. So that's one part of this presentation. The other one I wanted to talk about is a different security problem, right? Some of you may have seen this slide before, this cartoon before, and the question is, why are people dumb? Why are people not doing security the way we want them to do security, right? I don't like to use the word hate. I tell my kids I don't like the word hate, but I hate this cartoon, right? I hate this cartoon because it introduces the notion that our users are stupid. Our users are not stupid. Our users are, in some cases, world-class at their specific fields, but they don't understand, or they don't grasp the nuances of security like we do, right? Which brings us to the realm, and amongst other things, of behavior economics, right? Behavior economics is a trend that started in about 30, 40 years ago, give or take, in that it introduces into economics the notion that the economic actors are not fully rational, right? And that we have cognitive biases that we all have, and that by having these cognitive biases, we fail to analyze things in predictable ways. This is a research that Daniel Kahneman got the Nobel Prize for in 2002, maybe? I don't remember. And just a couple of weeks ago, Richard Thaler got the Nobel Prize for his work on behavior economics as well. And then there's others that talk about the effects of behavior economics. I'm not going to go through all of it, of course. but the idea being that people misbehave in predictable ways, okay? A couple of things that come up from on the behavior side. Prospect theory is the notion that we misjudge probabilities and risk. And what I mean here is that you will end up, we predictably ignore, we predictably pay more attention to high visibility events, right? It's why people are afraid of flying in planes, or they're afraid of getting eaten by sharks, when to a large extent that's not what's going to kill you. It's going to be the extra cheeseburger that you have, or it's going to be the crossing the road without looking both ways, what have you, right? What's the consequence? What's the equivalent of that in security? It's that we're going to be hit by a Chinese. We're going to be hit by an 11 vulnerability string of against our Samsung S8. When in reality it's going to be because you left admin as on a portal password somewhere, right? That is the stuff we ignore. And as we come as you guys come to industry, right? As you come to we have this obsession with the high technically complex security events. What most organizations need is much simpler, right? What most organizations need is help them patch better, help them do user authentication better, help them do security in their environments better. Forget about the highly sophisticated stuff. Yes, it might. For some, it'll be there, but for the majority of them, it becomes much more a public health conversation versus a highly advanced medical research conversation, right? Anyway, cognitive biases galore. The availability bias, we tend to look for information that confirms what we expect. So, for example, we are all aware now of the vulnerabilities in Pont 1, which are relevant for us to be aware of, but it's not as that's what's available to us right now, right? Sorry, that's sunk cost bias. We spent money on something, so we're going to have a hard time giving up just because we spent money on it, and so on. One of my personal favorites is intertemporal choice, which is hyperbolic discounting. You value the present a lot more than you value the future, even if the future is supposed to be more valuable. It's the example, even if the value of the future is much higher, you discount a lot more. So it's why eating a cheeseburger now is better than living an extra 4 years in the future, kind of thing. I'm exaggerating, of course, but you know what I mean. Our other problems around information asymmetry comes here again, shows up again in the human relations. There's something called the principal-agent problem of economics. And in principal-agent, the principal-agent problem is that in a scenario with asymmetric information, how a principal, so there's a principal, somebody who hires someone to do something. The other person is the agent, right? So if I hire John to be my agent, I'm the principal, he's the agent. If I don't know how to evaluate the work that he's doing, he's going to act in his self-interest, regardless of my interest, even if I'm paying him, right? How does this show up itself? And a security example. It's 5 o'clock in the evening and you have to send a document out by end of day, right? If you're going to act in your own interest, are you going to, as a user, are you going to use the approved workflow for secure file transfer, or are you just going to send the damn email and encrypt it, right? So this notion of how does, I mentioned information asymmetry, it plays a part in understanding how people behave, right? The externalities I mentioned earlier show up again. The example I have here is moral hazard. People are taking more risk on behalf of others, right? Oh yeah, you know what? Yes, I'm going to accept that risk for this thing because I don't care. I want to accept it even though other people are going to actually be suffering that. And the one thing I want to call out is that we also have this notion that to a large extent, we have to be careful. Security advice itself is an externality as we go out to our users. We were talking here earlier about ransomware and backups and whatnot, right? Yeah, you know what? Yeah, go easy. You know what? Go ahead and install a backup solution. Okay, it took us 10 seconds, 5 seconds to give that piece of advice. It's going to take how long is it going to take the user to actually implement that advice? Days, weeks, over time. And there is a fantastic paper, and I highly recommend it, by Cormac Hurley. He's over at Microsoft, on the rejection of security advice being a rational economic decision. The paper is called So Long and No Thanks for the Externalities, I believe, right? Because the advice we give people, oh, you have to check the browser, you have to check the padlock, oh, you have to check the URL, oh, you have to check the whois records for when the domain was registered. Oh, you have to check if the other domains register to the same whois entity. I'm like, really? So it makes sense for users to reject that. The message I want to get to people is that if we're not careful, our users ignoring us is a rational economic decision for them to make, okay? This cannot be a presentation if it doesn't, in 2017, if it does not involve the words ransomware somewhere, right? I think that ransomware is a fantastic economic problem to analyze. It's a terrible scourge, and I hope I could make it go away, but I cannot, right? And why did ransomware grow up, or why did it bubble up as it did, right? To a large extent, it bubbled up because now there are efficiencies in extracting payment, right? It's easier. Bitcoin is not fully anonymized, but it's easy enough, right? There are tremendous incentives for there's bad incentives all around, right? Because there's an incentive for the malware writer to get extra. They're going to collect a much bigger share of that money than they would with other fraud. If I steal your credit card information, I'm going to sell it at wholesale for maybe $4 a card somewhere, or what have you, or $10 or $20 or whatnot. If I can get 50% of $300, that's a much better deal for me, right? So for a malware writer, it makes sense. Ransomware also exploits cognitive biases that we have as well, right? That's the point I wanted to bring up when we were talking about it. Why do people pay? Because they are exploiting our behavior of it's right in your face, there is absolutely nothing you can do about it, right? And there's a scarcity element to it. If you don't pay in so many hours, you're done, right? People will pay because of that, and they know it, and they use it, okay? So there is an economic angle to ransomware. Which brings us to, somewhat related to this, I've had a career as a sales engineer, and the topic of persuasion comes up a lot, right? So how you do a good presentation to people. And there's a fantastic book I recommend called Psychology, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, by a guy named Robert Cialdini. Has anyone knows of him? So he's a social, is he economics or social psychology? I forget. He wrote a book on marketing about how to influence people, right? This is almost like a Stephen Covey kind of thing. But he talks about that one of the ways to navigate, he's now a professor at the University of Arizona, I believe, and is that you can nudge people towards influence by appealing to different scenarios. One of them is you appeal to someone's, you have an appeal of authority. Hey, listen, I have X years in this field, and I have these many awards, and I have 15 degrees and whatnot, right? I'm an authority, you should listen to me, right? That's one element. The other element is scarcity. This deal is only good for 24 hours. If you don't buy now, this deal is going away, right? There's an element of liking, right? You're more likely to receive, to be influenced by people you like, right? Or people, or brands that you like and whatnot. There is an element of reciprocity. You are more likely to sorry, I forgot the word. You're more likely to reciprocate if somebody gives you something. Why? Like, there's security conferences all around. Why do people get security tchotchkes and whatnot at security conferences? Why do vendors give them out?
Because they get something for free and it's available to them and other people don't have it.
So there's an element of, hey, listen, I got this cool thing at a conference that you don't have, and hey, the vendor can come back to you and say, hey, listen, they don't explicitly say it, but they can say, hey, listen, did you enjoy the time at RSA or Black Hat or Sector or Hackfest or whatever conference it is, right? So there is an element of, I'm going to give you something, and it's more likely that you're going to listen to my message if you're going to reciprocate. Right? There is an element of social proof as well, and social proof is a notion that you are going to be doing something because you see other people doing it. And I know we're recording. I admitted it on a blog post when I wrote about this. I'll admit it on video and audio now. Is I fell hard for that free Disney cruise, for free Disney tickets when you go scam. It's almost a scam, right? Because you go to Florida and Disney tickets are expensive, and then there's this promotion. Hey, come listen to pitch.
Oh, timeshare pitch.
Timeshare pitches. I fell for those. I fell for those, and it
parents did too.
What? I fell, and one of the things I remember the most about that is when I was there, was all those people around me getting up and saying, yes, I'm going to buy that, or whatever. I fell for it, right? I was young, I was stupid. I'm still stupid, just not as young anymore. But the fact is that thing has an effect. So when you go to, I wrote about security, psychology, or the behavioral aspect of certifications a while back. Why is it that vendors like when you do security or certification exams at their conferences? Because you see a sea of people writing the same certification as you are, right? I mean, AWS reInvent is coming up in a few weeks, and it's a good place to, like, if you're going to do Amazon certifications, that's where you write them and whatnot. Why? Because there's the social proof element. Other people in the room are doing the same thing as you are, so you're going to go along with that. And the final one is consistency. The notion that you are going to conform to things that confirm your internal consistency or something. There's a fantastic study that they did. If you go read the book, they'll describe it in the book, but about people would accept advertising on their lawns about saving the environment. They would accept a much bigger, much more intrusive piece of advertising if a few weeks before they answered yes on a survey that they were concerned with the environment or something, right? So you're going to do something that resolves, that makes you consistent. So it speaks to the persuasion aspect of, hey, listen, you really care about security, right? So that's why you're here. Well, okay, so you're going to really do something about it. The reason I bring up psychology of persuasion in the context of economics is that we are not perfect, right? There is an irrationality to humans that gets exploited for security from the bad guys, gets exploited from security, and from the when people are trying to sell you something, right? And it's something that we have to be aware of and not expect people to be different. So by doing less of it, we should be doing less of blaming users. Economics understood after hundreds of years that people are not fully rational actors. Let's not make the same mistake with security, right? Let's not put our users in a position where we expect them to be perfect, right? Your protection against phishing shouldn't be just a training session, a 2-hour training session once a year. Don't click on phishing links, right? Because people will click on them. And if you build a security solution that expects that people have to be perfect, I'm sorry, the onus is on you, not on them, right? I'll just go briefly over this. Where is, we expect management is going to help us solve all these ails and whatnot, and they're not, right? They're busy doing other things. There is one principle I like to talk about with we can have a different conversation around how important security actually is for people, right? And you're going to find that, in some extent, they are dealing with much bigger problems than what we're talking about, right? If you factor in how much money are we expected to lose in cybercrime in 2017, does anybody have a number, order of magnitude? How much money overall are we losing? It's a hard number to get. I've heard numbers anywhere from $600 billion to $3 trillion. That's a huge number, right?
Like the high end of that is like larger than the budget of the U.S. government.
Maybe. Well, that's a scary number. So it goes back to the human perception of how a human treats large numbers. But let me give you a different perspective. What's the total GDP of the world? I just gave you a number of $600 billion on the low end. If I tell you that the GDP of the world is around 100 trillion, does $600 billion make that much of a difference? 0.6%? So my point is, what we do with security is important, but we have to frame it in the context of there's bigger concerns out here, right? And I'm sorry that's not a very rah-rah message that we are the most important thing in the world. We're not. Right? Sorry for the cold shower on this. I'll skip over the risk management stuff. I'm way over my time already. But risk management is an interesting. You guys had risk management courses before. I'm not going to go through that. One thing I like to talk about risk is that to the extent that's possible, as you're going out and doing risk management in your future roles, as much as you can, if you can switch to a more quantitative approach to risk management as opposed to a qualitative one, that would be preferable. Because picture yourself as a CISO sitting at the table, at the boardroom, right? And your chief financial officer gets up and says, okay, our value at risk from our investments is $350 million and yada, yada, yada at this level of percentage and whatnot. You get your sales executive getting up and saying, okay, our sales pipeline is expected to generate $530 million over this range and so on. You have your CTO getting up and saying, okay, our IT budget over the next 5 years is expected to be $110 million, whatever. And then you get the CISO standing up and he or she says, our risk is red. How can you take that seriously? So my point is, I'm sorry, I'm going completely off script here, but my point is, to the extent that you can, we have to base our decisions on something, right? We have to, if we expect to have a conversation at the board level on the importance of cybersecurity, we should frame that conversation in a language and at a level of detail that they expect. And it goes back to my earlier point. These are not stupid people. These are senior executives who have risen to the top of their professions. And if we treat them as stupid, again, the onus is on us, right? They understand their business a hell of a lot better than we understand their business, right? So let's keep that in mind. I'll bring up that there's issues about security decisions as well. The economics comes back again. The example of hyperbolic discount in the context of security decisions. I don't care about that. You know what? That firewall rule, let's leave it any for now, and we're going to fix it later, right? You guys know when that rule is going to be fixed, right? That's hyperbolic discounting, right? The pain of doing something immediately is greater than or you choose to do something immediate for the immediate gain. The principal agent problem comes up on security decisions as well. I've heard and numerous cases, and if you've been in auditing, you may have seen across this too. Sometimes you come back from an audit and you have findings that are high, medium, and low, for example, on a particular incident, and you realize that the people are arguing with you, like your client argues with you about those risks, not necessarily because they want to fix them, but because they want to downgrade the high risks to medium. Why do they want to do that? Because the high risks only the high risks go up to their manager, right? So there's a principal agent problem at play here in that your security manager is really just hiding stuff under the table, or they're downgrading the risks because it's not going to affect them. Oh yeah, it was a medium risk. Okay, right? That's the principal agent problem of economics at play, right? And the misaligned incentives. I'll just have a note here that sometimes people like to do a pay for. Okay, let's improve security. Let's pay per bug, right? Every bug you find that we're going to pay you more. What do you think is going to happen if you pay per bug?
People are just going to write bugs.
People are just going to write bugs.
There's a Dilbert cartoon.
Yeah, literally.
There's a Dilbert cartoon where the boss is like, okay guys, for every single bug, I'm gonna give you guys like an extra $100 bonus, and the guy's like, I'm gonna write myself in a minivan.
There's a famous case that happened, I believe it was in Vietnam or India. I've heard Vietnam and I've heard India in the 1700s, about the snakes or the rats. I've heard snakes and rats.
Yeah.
You know.
It was India.
It was India, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that people were raising. They had a snake infestation. Okay, bring us a dead snake and we pay you something. What happens? People bred snakes, of course, right? Same thing happens here.
Once they stopped the program, they just dumped the snakes.
Yeah,
So
because
they
now,
didn't fall in love with it.
yeah, now I have an infestation of snakes. There is a lot of there's more discussion around security investment and whatnot. If you have the time to read it, there's a paper by Sasha Romanowski. He's over at RAND about the cost of malware, right? That about the actual impact of security breach. What's the? I see a face there.
Sorry, it's a Russian name and I'm Russian. That's all. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, it has nothing to do with it.
Oh, okay. So please. So Sasha Romanowski is a researcher over at RAND, and he did an interesting paper that came up with the average cost per breach for an organization. He's part of the rationale I used to talk about the 0.6%. Actually, he came up that the typical security instance only costs 0.2% of an organization revenue, yada yada yada, right? And we're always looking for efficiencies. People have been doing bug bounties. The difference between bug bounties and penetration tests is interesting from an economic incentive perspective because a pen test is usually time boxed. If I find 10 bugs within 30 hours, that's great, okay. But if I use this, if you're paying per finding, as a bug bounty would do, you'll typically find a lot more and so on. I'll just wrap up on a couple of things. Information asymmetry comes up, and perverse incentives, they come up again on hiring and education. And at some point in time, you are going to be out there working, looking for a job, hiring people and whatnot. And this is where the notion of information asymmetry is particularly relevant. Actually, the mechanism of signaling was first explained in the context of credentials and certifications and whatnot, right? Is a security certification necessary? Yeah, it depends. It depends.
Well, it depends. Like, not more often not no, but if your client requests a certification, like, oh, we can only have SIS work on this project, or something like that.
Yeah, should you take it? Probably. Yeah, if you want to do it. And like I've worked at resellers where we had to have so many people have to be certified. Have to be vendor certified at this level for us to get an extra discount and so on. That exists, right? But if you have to look at credentials as a way of resolving the information asymmetry, right? Now, on the screening piece, That's the job. That's the interviews as well. If it's very difficult to expect, it's very difficult to resolve the information asymmetry, then your screening process is going to be that much tougher, if you will. So if you're trying to fake your way through a certification, expect questions on that certification, and yeah, if you can answer. Yeah. There's perverse incentives around. There's again, hate is a strong word. I really dislike the people who prey on insecurities of job seekers and say, here, come here and do this certification. It's going to guarantee you that you do that.
Yes, there's ones on the buses in Mississauga right now that are basically saying, come get your, I think it's like your Cisco, your CCNA or something like that. And they basically say, you will be making like 100K within a year. They are literally making that claim on bus ads.
No,
for like a CCNA.
Don't get me started. So again, economics shows up, and I've went completely off script. I'm like over my time, like you wouldn't believe. So I apologize. So I'll just go back to wrapping up. What did we cover in this? We talked a little bit about market dynamics. I hope I conveyed a little bit about how understanding economics helps understand why people do things. Right? I try to do it without fancy charts, too many, and without fancy math. But the notion is that if you understand things, that the market behaves the way it behaves for rational economic reasons, and if you're going to go up against that, well, good luck with that. Right? You have to work within the constraints of that market. Right? We talked about information asymmetry, which I explained poorly, but I think it's one of the most important concepts for you to grasp when you're talking about security, because it's always difficult to evaluate security of something. It's always difficult to evaluate the quality of something. So if you understand that that's a scenario for information asymmetry, and that you resolve information asymmetry with signaling and screening, well, you're well on your way. We talked a little bit about externalities, that how an externality is something that you are not you're not paying the full cost of the decision that you are making, right? So that has consequences down the line. Does anyone here remember a video of Steve Ballmer when he was, so Steve Ballmer, former CEO of Microsoft, going back to the Microsoft conversations, right? When he was, there's a video of him shouting, developers. Have people seen that? Right? That guy was fantastic. Like, I mean, he was a showman, right? He still is, he's still alive. But there's a video of Steve Ballmer shouting, developers. That's what get Microsoft right. If I was going to do a similar version, I'm not. I would be shouting incentives. We have to understand how people are incentivized, and we have to understand how to address those incentives, right? If we're going to, there's another element to this, which is addressing the environment, the current environment, which is more the behavior economics aspect, but we don't have too much time for that. I do have links on the presentation for additional things. I didn't mention Kelly Shortridge. She is now over at the company called Security Scorecard, I believe. She left BAE, yes. So Kelly left BAE, and she has some very interesting papers on behaviors economics for security, right? There's other content as well, but she's great. I have, if you have the inclination to read more academic articles, the workshop on the economics of information security, WISE, is a conference that runs every year, and they have amazing papers on much deeper aspects of economics of security. They talk about incentives, they talk about phishing, they talk about credit card fraud, and we didn't cover a lot of this stuff, right? And CIRA, the Society of Information Risk Analysts, is an organization tied a little bit more for that. It bends more quantitative on the risk management side, so I'm advocating for their position. Remember, don't tell people that the risk is red. Right? And I'll just wrap up with this. Has anybody seen or not seen Moneyball? Right? I tear up when I watch that movie. And there's a scene where Oh my God, Jonah Hill, yes, is explaining to Brad Pitt about the behavior of markets in baseball, right? And he goes along the lines that I paraphrase, but there is an epidemic failure to understand what is really happening, and that leads, in their case, players, in my case, security. That leads security to misjudge and mismanage security, right? We see all the hacking, all the stunt hacking. I see that as an imperfect understanding of where security comes from, right? Your goal shouldn't be to buy a security product. Your goal should be to set behavior for people, right? And in order to set behavior, you have to design their environments and their incentives, right? The thinking that we have in security is medieval, and we're asking all the wrong questions. Right? I'll stop there. If you see this is me paraphrasing that theme, but the fact of the matter is that if we're going to change anything in our industry, it has to be looked at from an economic perspective, right? I suggest you understand as you go to do your jobs, as you go through your careers, what is the economic angle for what's going on right then and there? Why is something not getting done, right? You'll find more often than not that it's an economic problem, not a truly technical one, right? You go on to address those imbalances. I leave you with the comment of don't be an externality yourself, right? Don't impose on your users things that for you it's very easy to say, but for them it's going to be a hassle, right? Either, yes, there is going to be a discrepancy, so your job should be to help them make that recommendation that much cheaper, right? Rather than, it goes back to my point, it goes back to my contrarian point we were doing earlier. Would I buy an Amazon, what's the name of it? Amazon Key? Yeah, would I buy an Amazon Key? You know what? For some people, for some threat models, absolutely, right? Let's not impose externalities on them, especially if we don't understand, if we don't share their threat models. On that happy note, thank you very, very, very much for your time, and I answer any questions, and I like this stuff. So. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fernando.
Yes, with a question.
I just actually wanted to make a comment to your last point that I would wholeheartedly agree that security should be more centralized towards changing behavior than implementing and purchasing a nice fancy tool. I think people get really surrounded by what's the best tool to use in security when you actually look at different enterprises. They may have those tools in place. More than likely, I'd probably say a vast majority of them are not even tuned accordingly. They're just shelf holders. And really, security needs to start at policy and behavior, right? The free things that don't even cost thousands and thousands of dollars, to implement.
You know what's the most powerful security tool in a scanner shop? Group policy. For the love of God.
Oh,
The
please,
amount of
yes.
sites I've showed up to that could have prevented things from happening by just putting a simple policy in place through group policy.
A couple of comments. I think you.
So one point to that is basically saying the main reason that they're willing to go out and just get those tools rather than actually configuring them is to get that high risk down to medium. The fact that you just have that appliance in place gets it down to medium or even low.
Or transferring risk.
After that, yeah, it transfers the risk.
I would disagree with that because that's security theater. That's not actually solving the problem.
Welcome to
It
consulting.
does, right? Generally, it's more like a checkbox, right? Yeah, it's a compliance checkbox, and we need to move away from that mentality of, let's just implement something it's like having policies for having the sake of a policy, but not having any means to enforce it, right?
Let me pick you up on a couple of things. I want to get to your comment, but just a couple of things. People get really hung up on compliance is not security, right? I agree to a point. right? Because compliance, to a large extent, is around shifting people to a more secure, yes, Windows updates remind me a little bit. But the point is that compliance helps. And in a number of shops, compliance is what pays the bills, right? You're not going to pay. Goes back to the incentives, right? What's the incentive for security? Oh, if we're not compliant, we're going to pay an extra fine. You know what? Fine, put your thing under the compliance regime. That being said, yes, compliance is not security. Your point about why people buy things. If you think about it from a very cynical point of view, what is a CISO's job, right? It's protecting his or her career, right? And if buying the next product is going to be a defensible behavior in the face of an attack, in the face of a particular threat, you are going to do that. I'll point you to two things. I'll point you to the paper I mentioned earlier, The Market for Silver Bullets, by Ian Gregg. There's also a presentation by, Thomas is his first name, I forgot his last name. He goes by Halvor Flake on Twitter. And he's at Google out of Europe. Look for the keynote that he did at Black Hat Asia 2017. Right? He did a very interesting keynote on what he calls portfolio purchases. I mentioned it, I had it listed briefly, but I skipped over it. And it's the notion that for a particular type of security officer, it is rational, from their point of view, to buy whatever product everyone else is buying to solve that problem. Because what happens? If you still get hit, you can say, oh, but look, I bought what everyone else was buying. Right? So it leads you to a scenario where you buy one of each, which, and to your point, doesn't get configured properly later. We go back to an economic problem. Why is it not configured properly? Because they didn't take the time to configure it, or because no one is being asked, did you configure it properly and did you run it properly? How are you going to verify if somebody is doing something properly? You go back to compliance, right? So don't knock too much on compliance because it's a very powerful motivator.
Oh, I wasn't.
For right.
I wasn't
Yeah.
thinking compliance. Compliance is probably one of the biggest drivers for security, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of, there's like this disconnect between business and security, and it needs to, mesh together a lot more, essentially, and the understanding from the business side. People think that, security drives business. It's the other way around. Business has to drive the security, and compliance helps in that regard because a lot of businesses only see security as an insurance policy, right? A lot of people don't want to use that big spend for security because it doesn't generate alpha. There's no money making really in security unless you're a security firm, right? So it's a hard ask again for a business. So
Sure.
Yeah, so absolutely. Compliance is definitely a big driver for security business and the industry itself.
You had a comment, I didn't want to lose it, sorry.
No, just I saw that you were a fan of Moneyball. I was wondering what your thoughts were on another movie about economics, The Wolf of Wall Street.
He played it beautifully. I didn't. Last time I watched it must have been a couple of years ago. So
the thing that McConaughey did, the chest pounding thing.
That was to prep.
Yeah, it wasn't a part of the movie.
It wasn't a part of the
They just
movie.
caught him off. They just started filming him because that was like a thing to prep.
Yeah,
for the scene.
DiCaprio.
That's why DiCaprio was just like, "What the hell's going on?"
yeah, that it speaks to a large extent to that mentality of let's game the system and we have to be careful about our ethical boundaries, right? On that note, if I read the book, I liked the movie, but I liked the book better, The Big Short. If you have a chance.
Yeah, that's a good movie. That's a really good movie.
Plus, there's a cameo on that movie by Richard Thaler, who's the economist who just won the Nobel Prize on behavior economics. So he's the one talking to Selena Gomez. There's a little explanation. They have a couple of explanations in The Big Short. One is Margot Robbie, and another one Selena Gomez and Richard Thaler in a party or something, right? So yeah, the thing is that economics drives the world, right? And let's not lose sight of that, right? And sorry, and I know it's cliche, but then again, economics is about explaining stuff, making the obvious appear complicated or whatever. So here I am. Okay. Thank you very, very, very much, everybody. I loved it. I'm a little over time. So.
Totally cool.